My own son looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't expect a single dollar from Dad's $92 million." But what happened during the reading of the will left everyone in that room speechless, including him. If you think betrayal only comes from strangers, wait until you hear what my own family did just days after I buried the man I loved for over 50 years. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way anyone expected. "She's still alive," a voice drifted up the staircase. I honestly thought she'd be gone by now. Laughter followed. Then another voice said, "Maybe someone should check her pulse before the lawyer gets here." More laughter. I froze. Those were the very first words I heard as I walked downstairs. I was still dressed in black. The scent of funeral roses still clung to my clothes. Only hours earlier I had stood beside my husband's grave, watching them lower his casket into the earth. I believed we'd all return home to grieve together. Instead, they came home to celebrate. Champagne glasses clinked together. Music played softly through the living room. People wandered through my home smiling, laughing, pointing at furniture as though they were shopping inside a department store. No tears, no prayers, no memories, only greed. I stood silently at the bottom of the stairs, gripping the polished banister my husband had refinished with his own hands decades ago. The home we'd built together had suddenly become nothing more than a prize to be divided. My grandson walked through the hallway carrying a stack of bright neon sticky notes. "This grandfather clock is mine." He slapped a sticker onto it. "So is the leather chair." Another sticker. "And definitely the china cabinet." Another one. He moved, from room to room as though he'd already inherited everything. His sister stood nearby, scanning the walls with a remodeling app on her phone. "We'll tear this room apart after she's gone," she said casually. "I'm thinking a spa." "No," another voice replied. "A wine room would add more value." Not one of them lowered their voices. Not one of them cared that I could hear every word. But what they didn't know was that every cruel sentence they spoke was pushing them one step closer to losing everything. I kept standing there. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked whether I had eaten. Nobody even offered me a chair. Eventually, my daughter-in-law appeared carrying a silver tray filled with champagne glasses. With the brightest smile I'd seen all week, she announced, "We're celebrating Harold's legacy. He built an empire. And now it's finally our turn," someone quietly added. "And it's time to clear out the ghosts." The room erupted in laughter again. When dinner was served, I searched for my usual chair. It wasn't there. The chair where I'd spent decades serving birthday dinners, Christmas meals, Thanksgiving prayers had disappeared. In its place sat a cheap folding chair with one uneven leg. Even that wasn't meant for me. "You'll probably be more comfortable in the mudroom," my daughter-in-law said without meeting my eyes. "Away from all the noise." "Comfortable?" I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than arguments ever could, they handed me a paper plate, dry chicken, cold potatoes, a stale dinner that looked as unwanted as I suddenly felt. I sat alone beside a mop bucket and a broken broom, while laughter echoed through the house I'd spent half my life turning into a home. No one checked on me. No one even noticed I had disappeared. From the dining room I could hear every word. "This place smells like mothballs. We should gut the kitchen. The wallpaper has to go." Someone peeled another bright sticker from the stack. "This sideboard's mine." Another laugh. Another memory claimed. Another piece of my life erased. My granddaughter walked through carrying her phone. "We'll remodel this entire section once she's out." She slowly spun in a circle while scanning the room. A spa would fit perfectly. No. Maybe a luxury wine lounge. They were already redesigning my future, while pretending I no longer existed. I wrapped both hands around my teacup just to stop them from shaking. Then came the sentence I'll never forget. Dad always said she'd die before him. A pause. Guess that was the only thing he got wrong. The room exploded again. I lowered my eyes, not because I was ashamed, because if I looked at them, they might have seen the tears. Another cousin sneered. Just let her rot with all these old memories. My granddaughter giggled. Can we keep cashing her pension if we forward her mail? My grandson shrugged. She's basically half dead already. Just give her the garden shed. I took one slow bite of the cold chicken. It tasted like chalk. Still, I swallowed it, because sometimes surviving humiliation is the hardest kind of strength. But here's what none of them knew. Hidden inside my sweater pocket was a folded document, 15 years old, protected like treasure, signed, notarized, and powerful enough to destroy every plan they were making upstairs. They believed I was just an old widow waiting to disappear. They had no idea I had once saved everything they were fighting over, and very soon they were going to find out. I stayed in that little mudroom for nearly an hour. The laughter never stopped. From where I sat, I could hear them arguing over lake houses, luxury cars, jewelry, even paintings that still hung on my walls. One wanted the Lexus. Another claimed the vacation cabin. Someone else insisted the designer scarves belonged to them because, as she put it, she's never going to wear them again. To them, I wasn't a person anymore. I was simply the final obstacle standing between them and their inheritance. Every laugh echoed through the house. Every joke cut a little deeper. But I never defended myself. I didn't need to, because resting quietly inside my sweater pocket was something far more powerful than anger. A single folded document, one piece of paper, that could erase every assumption they'd made about me. Here's what they never bothered to ask. Who really saved this family when everything was falling apart? Because the answer wasn't my husband. It was me. 15 years earlier, our world had been collapsing. I still remember the night Harold walked through the front door. His tie hung loose around his neck. His shoulders sagged. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. After more than 50 years together, I could read the fear in his silence. He sat in front of the fireplace and stared into the flames. Finally, he whispered, "If we don't close this deal, it's over." The company was drowning. Banks were calling every day. Clients were leaving. Employees feared they wouldn't receive another paycheck. Everything we'd spent decades building was slipping away. "There are investors willing to help," he said quietly, "but they need collateral." Money. Money we didn't have. Harold was a proud man, too proud to ask anyone for help. He would rather lose everything than admit he was desperate. So that night, while he slept beside me, I made a decision that changed all of our lives. I quietly opened the old wooden drawer at the back of our closet. Inside rested a velvet jewelry box. Every piece inside carried a memory. The diamond earrings Harold gave me on our wedding day. My mother's emerald necklace. The heavy gold bangles I'd worn when I first entered this home as a young bride. Each one held a chapter of my life. I picked them up one by one, held them in my hands, and whispered goodbye. The next morning, before Harold even woke up, I sold every single piece, every heirloom, every memory, every treasure. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. By noon, the money had already been transferred directly into the company's escrow account. When Harold discovered the funds, he looked at me in confusion. "Where did this come from?" I simply smiled. "Use it. Don't ask questions. And whatever happens, never let them see you fall." He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded. He never asked again. 2 days later, the investors signed. The company survived. Within a year, it was thriving. New contracts poured in. The newspapers called Harold a visionary. Business magazines praised him as a self-made genius. Television interviews celebrated his brilliant leadership. Everyone applauded the miracle. No one ever knew. That miracle had been paid for with a wife's wedding jewelry. But that wasn't even my biggest sacrifice, not even close. Months later, Harold prepared for the most important presentation of his career. The company planned to go public. But every proposal his executives produced failed. Nothing impressed the board. Night after night, he came home exhausted. Stacks of rejected documents filled his briefcase. One evening, he sighed. I don't know how to convince them anymore. He fell asleep shortly afterward. I couldn't. So I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat beneath the old yellow light, and began writing. Hour after hour, page after page, I built an entirely new strategy. Expansion plans, market analysis, growth projections, supply chain reforms, investment structures, everything the company needed. Long before I became a wife, I'd studied finance. I'd loved business. I'd dreamed of building companies. But somewhere between raising children, making dinners, washing clothes, and putting everyone else's dreams first, my own had quietly disappeared. That night, they returned. By sunrise, the proposal was finished. I signed it using a fake name, folded every page neatly into an envelope, and mailed it anonymously to Harold's office. No return address, no signature anyone could trace. 2 days later, he received it. That evening during dinner, he couldn't stop talking about it. You won't believe this, he laughed. Someone anonymously mailed us the most brilliant proposal I've ever read. He flipped through the pages while eating. The funny thing is, the handwriting almost reminds me of yours. I smiled softly, kept stirring the soup, and said nothing. 6 months later, that same proposal became the blueprint for the company's historic public offering. Investors poured in. Millions became tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. The newspapers called it revolutionary. They placed Harold's smiling face on magazine covers across the country. A bronze plaque appeared in the company lobby. Built through extraordinary vision. His vision, his brilliance, his legacy, my words, my ideas, my silence. For years, I convinced myself it didn't matter. A family only needed one hero. If that hero was my husband, I could live with that. But there's something no one tells women. If you stay invisible long enough, people eventually forget you were ever there at all. And that was exactly what my family had done. They remembered the empire, but they forgot who had drawn the map. Little did they know, I had kept every original draft, every receipt, every transfer, every handwritten page, locked safely away where no one had ever thought to look. And after hearing everything they said about me, I finally decided it was time to open that folder again. That night, long after the laughter had faded, after the champagne bottle sat empty, after the last bedroom door finally closed, I lay awake on the narrow cot they had placed in the old laundry room. The ceiling above me was stained with years of moisture. A single light bulb flickered every few minutes. The room smelled of bleach and mildew. This was where my family believed I belonged. Not in the bedroom I'd shared with Harold for 52 years. Not beside the memories we'd built together. But next to a utility sink and a mop bucket. I stared into the darkness for a long time, not crying, not angry, just remembering. Then slowly, I sat up. My knees protested with every movement. I reached beneath the loose floorboard hidden beneath the cot, exactly where I'd left it years ago. My fingers brushed against old leather. I pulled out a worn brown folder. Time had faded its color. Dust covered the edges. But everything inside remained exactly as I remembered. And as I opened it, I realized something. The people upstairs thought they knew every secret this family had ever kept. In reality, they didn't even know the first chapter. Inside were documents no one had ever seen, the original bank transfer, receipts from the jewelry sale, letters Harold and I exchanged during the hardest years of our marriage, my handwritten drafts, investment agreements, trust documents, every sacrifice, every decision, every piece of proof that I'd quietly protected for 15 years. I ran my fingers across the pages, not because I needed to remember, because I needed the courage to finally let someone else remember too. That was the moment I made my decision. No more silence, no more disappearing, no more allowing history to be rewritten. At sunrise, I tucked the folder beneath my coat and quietly walked out the front door. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. To them, I was already invisible. The morning air was cold. Each step made my knees ache. But somehow, I felt lighter than I had in years. 2 blocks away stood an old pharmacy. Beside it, a weathered payphone. My cell phone had mysteriously stopped working the day after Harold's funeral. Perhaps it had been an accident. Perhaps not. Either way, they had forgotten one important thing. I still remembered the only number that mattered. I dropped a coin into the phone. It rang twice. Law offices of Alden and Associates. "This is Mr. Alden." I closed my eyes. "It's Eleanor." A brief silence followed. Then he spoke gently. "I've been expecting your call." Only 4 words, yet somehow, they carried more kindness than my own family had shown me all week. "I think," I whispered, "it's finally time." Again. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. "Come see me tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting." What happened in that office would change everything. The following morning, I walked through the heavy oak doors of Harold's law firm. Mr. Alden greeted me personally, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with respect, the kind I'd almost forgotten existed. He pulled out a chair, made us both tea, then waited. I placed the old leather folder on his desk. Neither of us spoke. I simply opened it, one document at a time. The first paper made him adjust his glasses. The second caused him to lean forward. By the third, he wasn't drinking his tea anymore. He was reading every word twice. Finally, he looked at me. "Eleanor, why has no one ever seen these?" I smiled sadly. "Because I promised Harold they never would," he nodded slowly. I kept that promise. Until now. The first document confirmed something no one in my family had ever questioned. I wasn't simply Harold's wife. I wasn't just listed as a dependent or a beneficiary. I was a legal co-founder of the original family trust. My name appeared beside Harold's equal, not beneath him. Beside him. Mr. Alden carefully placed that document aside. Then I handed him another, the investment agreement. It detailed every dollar transferred into the struggling company 15 years earlier, including the source, jewelry.family heirlooms, personal assets, everything I'd sacrificed, everything everyone believed Harold had somehow achieved alone. Mr. Alden looked up. "So it really was you?" I nodded. I never wanted credit. I only wanted him to survive. He remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Is that all?" I almost laughed. No. Not even close. I slid another bundle of papers across the desk, yellowed notebook pages, covered in handwritten notes, market projections, expansion strategies. Growth models, every page written in my own hand. The IPO proposal. I whispered. I wrote it. Mr. Alden blinked. The anonymous submission. Yes. The one signed under a different name. I nodded. He compared the handwriting, then looked back at me. Eleanor. Do you realize what this means? I wasn't sure. But he already did. He picked up the telephone immediately. I need a forensic handwriting specialist. The best one available. As soon as possible. I thought the truth would simply clear my name. I had no idea it was worth millions. Nor did I realize. The greatest surprise wasn't hidden in my folder. It was hidden inside one of Mr. Alden's own files. A file Harold had left behind, with my name written on it. And once that envelope was opened, there would be no turning back. Mr. Alden didn't waste a single minute. As soon as I finished speaking, he gathered every document from the desk with extraordinary care, almost as if he were handling pieces of history, because that's exactly what they were. He picked up his phone. I need the handwriting specialist here this afternoon. There was a brief pause. No, this can't wait. He hung up and looked back at me. Eleanor, if these documents prove what I think they prove... He stopped himself. Your family has no idea what's about to happen. Neither did I. I had walked into his office hoping for one thing. The truth. I never imagined the truth would be worth millions. The handwriting expert arrived just after lunch, a quiet woman carrying a black leather case. She introduced herself politely, before laying out magnifying lenses, digital scanners, and several sealed evidence envelopes across the conference table. For nearly 2 hours, she compared every page, every signature, every handwritten note, every curve, every loop, every tiny detail of each letter. The room remained almost completely silent. I watched through the window as rain slowly rolled down the glass outside. My heart beat harder with every passing minute. Finally, she removed her glasses, folded her hands, and looked directly at Mr. Alden. There is no doubt. She slid her report across the table. The handwriting is an exact match. Every page, every draft, every calculation, every strategy had been written by me, not Harold, not an anonymous consultant. Me. Mr. Alden closed his eyes for a moment, then smiled. I suspected as much. But that wasn't the biggest discovery. Not even close. The expert reached into her case once more. There is something else. She unfolded another document. This proposal wasn't just an idea. It qualifies as intellectual property, Mr. Alden frowned. What does that mean? It means whoever created this framework retained legal ownership. Unless those rights were formally transferred. He looked at me. Were they? I slowly shook my head. No. I never signed anything. The expert nodded. Then the ownership never changed. The room fell silent. Mr. Alden leaned back in his chair, almost whispering to himself. My God! For 15 years, everyone had believed Harold alone created the strategy that transformed the company. Legally. That wasn't true. The blueprint, the foundation, the very idea that launched the empire, still belonged to its original creator. Me, I struggled to process what I was hearing. I don't understand. Mr. Alden gently pushed the report toward me. Eleanor. The royalties generated from that strategy. They're yours. I stared at him. My royalties? He nodded. The company continued licensing that business model. Every expansion, every international partnership, every corporate adaptation, they all generated revenue. I swallowed hard. And where has that money been going? Mr. Alden stood, walked toward an old filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, then removed a thick black folder. I think, "You're about to find out." He placed the folder in front of me. Inside were financial statements stretching back more than a decade, quarter after quarter, year after year. Every payment had been carefully documented. None of them had been claimed. None of them had disappeared. They had simply been held, waiting for someone to prove who truly owned the work, waiting for me. I slowly turned another page, then another. The numbers became larger each time. Hundreds of thousands, millions, more millions. By the final statement, my hands had begun to tremble. Mr. Alden quietly broke the silence. The accumulated royalties exceed anything I expected. I looked up. "How much?" He removed his glasses. "Enough to change several generations." I couldn't breathe, not because of the money, because for 15 years, the world had unknowingly been profiting from something I'd created in complete silence. Then Mr. Alden said something that made my heart stop. "There is one last item." He reached back into the cabinet. This time, he removed a single sealed envelope, yellow with age. My name was written across the front, in Harold's handwriting. My fingers froze. "I've never seen this." Mr. Alden nodded. He instructed me not to deliver it. "Until after his death." My chest tightened. I carefully broke the seal. Inside rested one handwritten letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, just like Harold's study. I unfolded it. The first line blurred instantly through my tears. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means I waited far too long to tell the world what should have been obvious from the very beginning." I stopped reading. My vision had become cloudy. Mr. Alden quietly looked away, giving me a moment. I took a slow breath, then continued. "You saved me long before anyone called me successful. You sold the treasures your mother left you without a single complaint. You gave me the courage I pretended came from myself." Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. I kept reading. The company they admire, the empire they praise, the future our children inherited. None of it would exist without you. My hands shook uncontrollably now. The next paragraph hurt even more. I accepted praise that belonged to both of us. Sometimes because I was weak. Sometimes because the world listened to men more easily than women. For that, I am deeply sorry. I covered my mouth. For years, I'd convinced myself Harold had forgotten, that perhaps he truly believed the success was his alone. I had been wrong. He remembered everything. Every sacrifice, every late night, every silent decision I'd made to keep our family standing. He had simply waited too long to say it aloud. Then I reached the final lines, the lines that would change everything. "When my will is read, let the truth finally belong to you. You built this beside me, never behind me. Forgive me for allowing the world to believe otherwise. Now, let them know your name." I lowered the letter slowly. Neither Mr. Alden nor I spoke. There was nothing left to say. The truth had finally found its voice. But while I sat there holding Harold's final words, my son, my grandchildren, and the rest of the family were back at my house, still placing colorful stickers on furniture, still arguing over who would inherit millions, completely unaware that every plan they were making was about to collapse the moment the will was opened. 3 days later, The entire family gathered at Mr. Alden's law office. They arrived dressed for victory. Designer suits, luxury handbags, expensive watches. If someone had walked into that room without knowing the truth, they would have thought they were attending a celebration, not a funeral. I arrived quietly. No one stood to greet me. No one asked how I was feeling. In fact, they barely looked at me at all. To them, I was nothing more than an old woman taking up a seat that would soon be empty forever. My son Joseph sat confidently at the head of the conference table. His legs were crossed. His espresso rested beside a leather folder already labeled Estate Planning. He smiled at his wife. I can't wait to get this over with. She leaned closer and whispered something into his ear. He laughed, then just loudly. Enough for everyone to hear, he said. She probably won't even make it to next Christmas. More laughter. I simply folded my hands in my lap. For the first time in days, their words no longer hurt, because I already knew something they didn't. This room wasn't about to reward their greed. It was about to expose it. My granddaughter sat across from me, texting nonstop. My grandson practiced signing his name on a legal pad, almost as if he were already imagining himself signing ownership papers. One cousin whispered, I already called the contractor. The renovation starts next month. Another replied, I'm taking the lake house. Someone else smiled. I've already picked out new furniture. They weren't waiting for the inheritance. In their minds, they already owned it. But then, the conference room door opened. Mr. Alden walked in. The conversation stopped instantly. He carried a thick briefcase beneath one arm. His expression revealed absolutely nothing. He greeted everyone politely before taking his seat. Thank you all for coming. We are gathered today to carry out the final wishes of Harold Brightwood. As stated in his revised and legally binding last will and testament, I noticed something. Only one word caused him to pause. Revised. No one else seemed to notice. But I did. Folders were passed around the table. Pages rustled. My family immediately began flipping toward the section labeled Assets. Not a single person asked about Harold. Not one. Mr. Alden watched them quietly, then reached into his briefcase once more. Instead of another document, he removed a small silver voice recorder. Joseph frowned. What's that? Mr. Alden answered calmly. Mr. Brightwood requested that his family hear his own words before the will is read. He pressed the play button. Static filled the room for a brief second. Then, Harold's voice echoed through the speakers. Older, softer, but unmistakably his. My heart nearly stopped. If you're hearing this, then I'm no longer with you. Silence settled over the room. Even Joseph looked uncomfortable. Harold continued. I've had a great deal of time to think. And I've realized something. I know my family. I know their strengths. And unfortunately, their weaknesses. The room grew noticeably quieter. No one moved. Then Harold said the sentence that changed everything. If my son ever speaks disrespectfully about his mother after my death, deduct $1 million from his inheritance for every single insult. Complete silence. Joseph blinked. What? Someone nervously laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Harold's voice continued calmly. I know exactly how many words he'll owe. My son's smile vanished. What is this? He looked toward Mr. Alden. Dad wouldn't write something like that. Mr. Alden calmly opened another folder. Oh. He absolutely did. He slid a thick transcript across the polished table. Its title read, Security System Audio. Log Joseph frowned. What is this supposed to be? Mr. Alden replied. Your father's home security system records audio throughout the main living areas. It continued recording for several days following his funeral. No one breathed. Joseph slowly looked at the transcript. His face began losing color. Mr. Alden started reading. "She's still breathing?" He turned the page. "Thought she'd be gone by now." Another page. "Maybe someone should check her pulse before the lawyer gets here." Another. "She built soup. Dad built the empire." Joseph shifted uncomfortably. His wife stared at the table. Mr. Alden continued reading. "Just give her the garden shed. She's basically half dead already. Can we keep cashing her pension?" Each sentence landed like a hammer. Every cruel joke, every insult, every careless laugh had been recorded, every single one. Then came the number that shattered the room. Mr. Alden closed the transcript. There were 88 verified statements made directly against Mrs. Brightwood. He looked toward Joseph. "Under Clause 14. That results in..." He glanced at the calculation. An $88 million deduction. No one moved. No one even blinked. Joseph slowly stood. His chair scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. "This is insane. You can't possibly enforce something like this." Mr. Alden didn't raise his voice. "It has already been enforced." Joseph slammed both hands onto the table. "My father would never leave me with nothing." For the first time that morning, I spoke. He would. The room turned toward me. Every pair of eyes, every whisper stopped. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I knew your father better than anyone, and unlike the rest of you. I actually listened when he spoke. Joseph opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Mr. Alden calmly adjusted his glasses. "As a result of those deductions, Mr. Joseph Brightwood's remaining inheritance totals..." He paused, then quietly finished. $3,800. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't merely quiet. It was the sound of certainty collapsing. My son's face had gone completely white. His wife immediately grabbed her phone, probably calling another lawyer, or perhaps praying someone could undo what greed had done. But the worst part hadn't even begun yet, because Joseph still believed he had lost money. He had no idea. He was about to discover who actually owned the empire he'd spent his entire life claiming as his birthright. And when Mr. Alden opened the second folder, the truth would leave every person in that room speechless. The room had gone completely silent. No one reached for their coffee. No one whispered. No one dared to laugh anymore. Joseph remained standing beside his chair, staring at Mr. Alden as if sheer disbelief could somehow change what had just happened. $3,800. That was all that remained of the fortune he had spent years believing was his birthright. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the folding chair, the mudroom, the cold plate of food, the laughter, the words, "She's still breathing." My sympathy quietly disappeared. Mr. Alden calmly gathered the first stack of papers and placed them back inside his briefcase. Then he reached for another folder. This one was much thicker, bound in dark blue leather. He rested his hand on it for a moment before speaking. "We're not finished." Several heads lifted. Joseph frowned. "What else is there?" Mr. Alden looked directly at him. "The primary estate." Confusion spread across the room. Joseph's wife forced a smile. "Well, I assume that's divided equally." Mr. Alden didn't answer. Instead, he slowly opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, investment portfolios, corporate trust agreements, stock certificates, and documents bearing signatures no one around the table had ever seen before. He turned the first page. In accordance with Mr. Harold Brightwood's revised estate plan. All remaining residential properties. Investment holdings. Corporate voting shares. and trust assets." He paused, then looked toward me. "Are awarded to his wife, Mrs. Eleanor Brightwood." No one reacted. Not at first. It was as though the words hadn't registered. Joseph blinked. "I'm sorry." "What did you say?" Mr. Alden repeated it without emotion. "The sole primary beneficiary." "Is Mrs. Eleanor Brightwood?" My daughter-in-law actually laughed. A nervous laugh. "That's impossible. There has to be a mistake." "There isn't." Mr. Alden slid the signed documents across the table. Every amendment was properly witnessed. Every revision was notarized. Every signature has already been verified. Joseph grabbed the paperwork. His hands shook as he flipped through page after page. Everywhere he looked, my name appeared. Not his. Mine. Then came the second shock. Mr. Alden removed a smaller envelope. Cream-colored. Perfectly sealed. "This," he said quietly, "is a personal letter, Mr. Brightwood requested be read aloud if there was ever any dispute regarding his wife's place in this family." He carefully unfolded the paper, then began reading. "To my children. If you're hearing these words, then you've already forgotten the woman who stood beside me when I had absolutely nothing." No one moved. Mr. Alden continued. "Before you admire the empire, remember who carried its foundation. Before you praise my success, remember who sacrificed hers." Joseph slowly lowered his eyes. His wife folded her arms tightly across her chest. No one interrupted. "When the banks closed their doors, she opened hers. When investors abandoned me, she believed in me. When I nearly lost everything, she quietly sold everything she owned, so that I wouldn't lose hope." A tear rolled down my cheek, not because the words were new, because they had finally been spoken aloud. Mr. Alden looked toward me briefly before continuing. "Many people called me self-made. They were wrong. Every success they celebrate carries Eleanor's fingerprints. She asked for no recognition. She accepted no applause. She simply loved me enough to disappear behind my accomplishments." The room had become painfully still. Even Joseph couldn't look at me anymore. If any member of this family has treated her as less than the heart of this home, then they have misunderstood everything I spent my life trying to build. Because this family was never built on money. It was built on her. Mr. Alden folded the letter carefully. No one spoke. Not even the air conditioning seemed to make a sound. Joseph finally broke the silence. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why? Why didn't anyone ever tell us?" I looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly. "Because I never wanted your father to feel small. He needed the world to believe in him, so I let them." Joseph slowly sank back into his chair. For the first time in years, he looked less like a successful businessman and more like the frightened little boy who used to run into my arms during thunderstorms. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know." Those two words carried decades of heartbreak. But fate wasn't finished. Not yet. Mr. Alden reached into the blue folder one final time. "There is still one unresolved matter." Several people looked up again. Joseph rubbed his forehead. "What now?" "Mr." Alden laid another stack of legal documents on the table. "An intellectual property claim." Joseph sighed impatiently. "What does that have to do with this estate?" Mr. Alden's expression never changed. "It has everything to do with it." He opened the file. 15 years ago. The strategy responsible for saving Brightwood Industries was submitted anonymously. Joseph nodded. So, it wasn't anonymous. It belonged to someone. He slid a framed certificate across the table. I recognized it immediately. The handwriting report, the patent registration, the ownership confirmation. Mr. Alden spoke slowly, the creator of the Brightwood stabilization model, the strategy that transformed this company into a multimillion-dollar empire, has now been legally confirmed. He looked directly at me. The author, the inventor, and the sole, intellectual owner is Mrs. Eleanor Brightwood. The room froze. Joseph stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time. His granddaughter dropped her phone. Someone at the far end of the table actually gasped. Then Joseph laughed once, a broken, disbelieving laugh. "No, that's impossible. My mother didn't build companies. She made soup." Mr. Alden smiled faintly. "Yes, she made soup. And then she went into the kitchen after everyone fell asleep and quietly built the empire you thought your father created alone." Joseph's face lost what little color it still had. Every memory he'd built his identity upon, every story he'd proudly repeated, every assumption he'd carried for decades, collapsed in a single moment, and the greatest revelation was still waiting inside the final envelope. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. Joseph sat motionless, staring at me as though I had suddenly become a complete stranger. For years, he'd believed his father built an empire from nothing. Now, in the span of a few minutes, that story had completely unraveled. His entire identity rested on one belief, that Harold Brightwood had done it alone. And now, that belief was gone. Mr. Alden slowly picked up the final envelope from his briefcase. Unlike the others, this one was sealed with dark blue wax. Its edges had yellowed with age. He rested it carefully on the table. "There is one final matter." His voice was calm, measured, almost solemn. "This envelope was placed into my custody nearly 15 years ago." He looked around the room. Mr. Brightwood instructed me to open it only after his wife's authorship had been legally verified. Joseph rubbed his temples. "There's more?" Mr. Alden nodded. "A great deal more." He carefully broke the seal. Inside rested several legal certificates, financial reports, and one handwritten note. He placed the reports aside and unfolded the letter first. "This," he said quietly, "is Harold's final explanation." He began reading. "If this letter has been opened, then Eleanor has finally been recognized for what she truly is. The brightest mind I ever had the privilege of knowing." I lowered my eyes. Even after all these years, those words were almost too much to hear. Mr. Alden continued. "People often ask me how I always seemed to know exactly when to expand, when to invest, when to change direction. The truth is, I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I simply married her." A quiet gasp escaped someone across the table. Every major decision that saved this company began as a conversation at our kitchen table. While I worried, she solved. While I hesitated, she planned. While the world applauded me, she quietly returned to washing dishes before breakfast. I closed my eyes. Memories rushed back all at once. Long nights, cold coffee, stacks of paperwork spread across our kitchen table, Harold pacing nervously, me scribbling notes until sunrise. None of it had ever felt extraordinary. It was simply what love looked like. Mr. Alden turned the page. I asked Eleanor to let me present her work as mine. The room became impossibly still. Not because she lacked brilliance, but because the board refused to trust women with decisions that shaped billion-dollar companies. Joseph's wife slowly covered her mouth. I told myself it was temporary, that one day I'd tell everyone the truth. But success came, then more success, and eventually, I became a coward. A tear rolled silently down my cheek. Harold had carried that guilt all those years. If you're hearing these words, then I'm asking for one final act of forgiveness. Not from my children, not from the board, from Eleanor, because history remembered my name when it should have remembered ours. Mr. Alden gently folded the letter. No one looked at anyone else. Shame had settled over the room like heavy fog. Then he picked up the financial reports. Now, to the remaining legal matter. He adjusted his glasses, the Brightwood stabilization model, the intellectual framework used during the company's public offering. Was registered under a protected pseudonym. Joseph interrupted. We already know that. Mr. Alden nodded. What you don't know is what happened afterward. He slid several accounting statements across the polished table. For the past 15 years, every company that licensed this model, every corporation that adopted its framework, and every international partner that utilized its methodology, paid royalties. Joseph stared blankly. How much? Mr. Alden looked directly at him. Approximately $9.4 million. Joseph let out a nervous laugh. For the company? Mr. Alden slowly shook his head. No. Per year. Silence. Absolute silence. My granddaughter dropped her pen. Someone's coffee cup tipped over unnoticed. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. Joseph swallowed hard. Per year? Yes. For 15 consecutive years. His lips parted. He tried to calculate the number in his head. Failed. Mr. Alden finished the calculation for him. The accumulated royalties, along with investment growth, now exceed $160 million, the room erupted. That's impossible. There has to be some mistake. Surely the company owns it. Mr. Alden calmly raised one hand. The company licensed it. It never owned it. The legal owner. He turned toward me. Has always been Mrs. Eleanor Brightwood. Joseph stared at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not pride, regret. He slowly stood. His voice trembled. Mom. For the first time since Harold's funeral, he didn't know what to say. No excuses, no arguments, no arrogance, just silence. Finally, he whispered the words I'd waited years to hear. I'm sorry. The room remained perfectly still. Every member of the family looked at me, waiting. Would I forgive him? Would I take pity? Would I pretend none of this had happened? I looked at my son, really looked at him. Then I remembered the folding chair, the mudroom, the paper plate, the cold chicken, the laughter, the sticky notes covering my home, the words. She's still breathing. My heart softened. But it didn't forget. Quietly, I stood, walked to the window, watched the rain fall against the glass. Without turning around, I spoke. An apology doesn't erase what someone chose to become. No one answered, because they knew I wasn't talking only to Joseph. I was talking to everyone in that room. But the greatest surprise of all wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't the royalties. It wasn't even Harold's confession. It was the decision I had already made before walking into that office. Because despite everything they had done, I had no intention of spending the rest of my life surrounded by people who only discovered my worth after they learned its price. The room remained silent. Not the uncomfortable silence that follows an argument. Not the tense silence before someone speaks. This was different. It was the silence of people watching the story. They'd believed their entire lives fall apart in front of them. For years, they had looked at me and seen an old woman, a widow, a burden, someone to be tolerated until the paperwork was finished. Now, they were looking at the woman who had quietly built everything they had ever been proud of. And somehow, That frightened them more than losing the money. Joseph stood frozen. His shoulders, once so confident, seemed smaller now. He looked older. Not because of age, because regret has a way of aging people in a matter of minutes. He swallowed hard. "Mom." His voice cracked. I was wrong. Those 3 words had taken him decades to say. "I didn't know." I turned toward him. "No, you didn't. But you never cared enough to ask." He lowered his eyes. There was no defense for that, one by one. The rest of the family avoided looking at me. My granddaughter quietly wiped away tears. The same granddaughter who had joked about forwarding my mail to cash my pension. My grandson stared at the conference table. His hands rested on top of each other now. Gone was the confidence of the young man who had walked through my house, placing neon stickers on furniture, as though my memories were prizes at an auction. No one spoke, because excuses sound very small when the truth becomes larger than pride. Then Joseph's wife slowly stood. She had always been the loudest voice in the room, the first to criticize, the first to laugh, the first to remind everyone that old people were in the way. Now, she couldn't even meet my eyes. She stopped, started again. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped her lips. I nodded politely. Nothing more. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. One can be given in a moment. The other must be earned over years. Mr. Alden quietly closed every folder. "I believe that concludes today's proceedings." He stood to leave, then paused. "There is one final document." Every head turned. Joseph sighed softly. "What now?" Mr. Alden smiled for the first time that morning. "This one comes from Mrs. Brightwood." Several confused faces turned toward me. I slowly opened my handbag. Inside rested another envelope, one I had signed the previous evening. I made my decision before I walked into this office today. Joseph looked surprised. "What decision?" I slid the papers across the table. "I've already signed them." Mr. Alden opened the envelope. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I see." He looked toward the family. "Mrs. Brightwood has decided to sell the estate." The room erupted. "What? Sell? The house? But that's our family home." Joseph looked stunned. "You can't sell Dad's house." I looked at him calmly. "No, it's my house. It has been for the last 20 minutes. And honestly, it stopped feeling like home the moment you all started putting stickers on my memories. No one argued, because no one could. Some houses hold love, others hold echoes. Every hallway in that house reminded me of Harold, our children learning to walk, birthday candles, Christmas mornings, late-night conversations in the kitchen. But after the funeral, new memories had been added, cruel ones. The folding chair, the mudroom, the laughter, the paper plate. No amount of fresh paint could cover those memories. Some wounds become part of the walls. So I chose peace instead. The house sold the following spring. I didn't cry while handing over the keys. I had already said goodbye long before the paperwork was signed. With the proceeds, and without touching most of the royalty money. I bought a small penthouse overlooking the ocean in Santa Barbara. No grand staircase, no ballroom, no endless empty rooms. Just sunlight dot quiet mornings, and windows that opened toward the sea. For the first time in decades, the silence around me felt peaceful instead of lonely. The royalty payments continued arriving every few months, steady, reliable, enough to live comfortably several lifetimes over. But I had no interest in becoming the richest woman in the room. Money had never been what I wanted. Recognition had, respect had, truth had. Once I finally had those, The rest became surprisingly unimportant. So I did something my family never expected. I created a foundation, not in Harold's name, not in mine alone, but in honor of every woman whose work had been hidden behind someone else's success. Women who built companies, wrote ideas, made sacrifices, and quietly disappeared while others accepted the applause. The foundation paid for scholarships, business grants, legal support, patent assistance, anything that helped brilliant women keep ownership of their own ideas. Because I knew exactly what it felt like to watch someone else receive credit for your life's work. And I never wanted another woman to experience that silence. Months later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a child's drawing, crayon on folded construction paper, a stick figure wearing glasses, standing beside a giant light bulb. Across the top, written in uneven purple letters, were the words, "Grandma, you think better than Google." I smiled through tears. It had been drawn years earlier by my youngest grandson, long before he learned to laugh when others laughed, long before he forgot who I really was. I framed it. Not because it was perfect, but because it reminded me that people are not born cruel. They learn it, which means they can also learn kindness. Joseph wrote to me many times, sometimes just one sentence, sometimes 10 pages. He never asked for money. He never mentioned the inheritance again. Only forgiveness. It took time, a great deal of time. But eventually, I invited him for lunch, not because the past had disappeared, because carrying bitterness forever is another kind of prison. We talked for hours, mostly about Harold, sometimes about business, sometimes about nothing at all. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had since he was a little boy, and for the first time in many years, it felt genuine. As for me, I stopped trying to prove my worth. The truth had already done that for me. I spent my mornings reading by the ocean, my afternoons mentoring young entrepreneurs, my evenings watching sunsets. Harold would have loved. Sometimes I still missed him. Every single day, in fact. But now, when I thought about our story, I no longer remembered only the sacrifices. I remembered the ending. Because in the end, he kept his promise. He made sure the world finally knew my name. So, if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever watched someone else receive credit for the work you poured your heart into, if you've ever felt invisible in your own story, remember this. People may ignore your voice for a season. They may underestimate your kindness. They may mistake your silence for weakness. But truth has a remarkable way of waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment arrives, it speaks louder than every lie ever told. They thought I had faded into the background. They thought I was just an old woman waiting to disappear. They were wrong. I wasn't fading. I was simply waiting for the right chapter to begin. And sometimes, the most powerful ending belongs to the person everyone stopped watching.